Okay, well, good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for being here. We're headed into the home stretch for spring break. I'm sure everybody's really excited about that. First off, I just want to take care of a little bit of business, which is for our regular A.P.E.X attendees. I just want to make sure that everybody knows that next week we are, for once in a blue moon, on a Tuesday, because 'tis the season for collaboration. I'm so excited. Our last 4 events of the season are all huge collaborations, this one included, which I'll tell you about. Next week, we are collaborating with business, and so that we want to make sure that all the business students can attend, and instead of having their normal lecture series on Tuesdays, we're all going to convene here for A.P.E.X. So just a reminder for those of you who like to come, next week is Tuesday, to usher you into spring break. All right, so this event is, in the spirit of collaboration, a brand new campus-wide collaboration that I am so excited about. Chris Jordan has been invited to SUU as our first official, and we hope ongoing annual, artist in residence. He was recommended by Professor Raina Gardner, and an exhibit of his work is in the Grace A. Towner Gallery, and it's really right in line with the Towner Center theme for this year, which is human values and a sense of place. So our collaborators, our co-collaborators for this are, of course, A.P.E.X Events, which you're here enjoying, the Towner Center, SUMA, and also Art Insights. So what an awesome cross-campus collaboration that we hope will continue for years to come. There are a couple other events that are going on. If you want to know more, there's the radio show at 3 p.m. Chris will be on the radio with me on KSUU Thunder 91.1. And then there is a gallery talk tonight at SUMA, which I believe is at 7. Am I right on the time on that? 7 or 7:30? 7 o'clock. I just wanted to double check. 7 o'clock at SUMA. So if you want to go check out the art and then hear from Chris more after what you hear today. Also, we do have one of his books for sale. It's absolutely gorgeous, and is outside. So if you'd like to have him sign or chat with him or check out that book, that's there for you. Okay. A little bit about Chris Jordan. Chris Jordan's work has been featured in galleries and exhibits around the world. He had a 2008 TED Talk, Turning Powerful Stats into Art, that garnered over 1.7 million views on YouTube. His work has been in so many places that I can't even list even an eighth of where they've all been. But a few, the Getty Museum, the LA County Museum of Art, the Horace Mann School in the Bronx, the Sophie Gallery in Melbourne, Australia, the Nevada Museum of Art in our backyard, and at the Alcatel-Lucent headquarters in Paris. But those are just, I mean, that's a fraction. He has spoken all over the world, making speaking appearances in Korea, Switzerland, Chile, Australia, Norway, Saudi Arabia, just to name a few. There's one quote about his work that I'd like to just leave you with, and then get him on stage to talk to you. Through his lens, Jordan explores contemporary mass culture from multiple perspectives, connecting the viewer viscerally to the enormity and power of humanity's collective unconscious. He challenges individuals to look both inward and outward at the complex landscapes of our collective choices. Ladies and gentlemen, Chris Jordan.
Hi, you guys. Greetings. Well, first of all, massive gratitude to the photography and humanities departments here for bringing me. It's been an amazing few days. And, you know, I thought I would start with just a really quick reflection on my experience here, because it's very different from the experience I've had at a lot of other colleges and universities lately in the US. I have the good fortune of getting to visit lots of colleges and universities. I've probably been to 50 or so in the US over the last few years. And you guys probably know that there's an atmosphere that has begun to kind of seep in slowly to the academic conversation that, to me, is really heartbreaking. In most of the colleges and the universities in the US now, there's a kind of hostility between the students and the faculty, and among the students as well, a kind of toxicity in the conversation. Everybody's offended with everybody. There's complaints, and everybody's kind of trying to walk on eggshells, but people don't know which eggshells to walk on anymore. And there's not a lot of learning going on. And this is all the way to the top of the most expensive and prestigious Ivy League schools. And so it's just such a breath of fresh air and a delight to be here where I didn't feel any of that. And so I don't know what it is you guys are doing, but I just feel a really cool vibe here. Like the students, the art students and photography students that I got to meet, and all of the faculty, the photography and art faculty that I got to hang out with, are just deeply engaged, seem to be having a really good time. And so I'm really delighted to be here. If you guys have a job opening anytime soon, then keep me in mind. What I thought I would do today is to share with you some of my artworks, a few that aren't in the exhibition at the gallery here, and just talk a little bit about my philosophy and slowly work toward a journey that I want to take you to a remote island in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. So here we go. So I never thought I would grow up to be this guy, but I have devoted a large percentage of the last 15 or 18 years of my life to taking photographs of giant piles of garbage. And the intention behind it is to face our mass consumption. And it's like this monstrous machine that we're all a part of, that I'm just as much of a part of. I flew here on a 747 to give this talk. So I'm in no position to wag my finger at anybody about mass consumption. It's something that we're all a part of and that we're all aware is causing this massive destructive effect on the living world. And not only having a damaging effect on our own future, but also the future of all beings. And how do we face it and deal with our own experience of being so small in this incomprehensibly huge consumptive world? How do we face it without falling into a space of hopelessness and despair? And how do we experience the irony of our own contribution to it? And how do we have integrity anymore, knowing the effect that our individual behaviors and our collective behaviors are having on the world that we love? These are the questions that motivate my work. I don't have any answers, I'm afraid, but to me the most interesting questions are the ones that don't have answers. So I started about 15 years ago making photographs of giant piles of garbage as a commentary, just to kind of begin to look into the maw of the beast. And one of the things that I found was that there's a strange kind of beauty to giant piles of garbage, giant piles of the things we waste. As I explored around the port of Seattle, where I lived at the time, I found stacks of crushed cars and piles of garbage that it was like layers in the Grand Canyon. And the colors, there was a kind of exquisiteness to the colors. And I found myself simultaneously drawn to the strange beauty of these things and also horrified by the subject of what it was. And I had a kind of epiphanous moment standing in front of this huge pile of garbage. This is the most garbage that I'd ever seen. And the intention of this whole project is to try to face our collective consumption. And that's what I thought I was doing, standing in front of this pile of garbage. And I took its photograph, and then this massive machine came around the corner, one of those giant machines like you see in mines that has tires that are like 10 feet tall and in this huge bucket device, and it picked up the entire pile and went and put it in a train car. And then the machine stopped and the guy climbed down and came over and asked, what in the world am I doing taking photographs of garbage? And I asked him, where's that going? And he said, well, that's the garbage train. And I said, the garbage train? He said, yeah, we have a 1 mile long garbage train that leaves Seattle every day. And I said, well, what was that I was just photographing? And he said, that's some of Wallingford's garbage for today. And Wallingford is a really small neighborhood. It's just a little tiny part of Seattle. And that was some of one day's garbage from that one neighborhood. I realized what I'm looking at, that's not our mass consumption. That's one drop in a river. And I had this craving to photograph the ocean that it all leads to. Like, how do I get myself in front of the Mount Everest of our garbage, where all of our old phones go, or all of our plastic bottles go? And of course, as a photographer, I was willing to travel anywhere. I was so interested in this subject. And I quickly discovered, of course, we all know, there is no such place. There is no Mount Everest of our garbage. There's nowhere you can go and see all of our mass consumption collected in one place. And so I was kind of stuck photographing the places where I could find some small amount of our waste. And I felt my photographic vision kind of getting darker as I tried to try to behold this invisible phenomenon of our mass consumption. After a while, I got interested in e-waste, and I traveled to Atlanta to visit a place where they shred cell phones. And the shredder was broken, and so they had lots of boxes of cell phones coming in, but they weren't getting shredded yet. By the way, that's what happens when you recycle a cell phone. The ones that still work get put back into use. The ones that don't work get shredded, and they burn the shred, and the only thing that's recovered is this infinitesimally tiny amount of gold that's in each phone. And that process has gotten a little bit better. Now there are demanufacturing facilities where they're actually taking the things apart and trying to divide them into separate metals. But back then, the whole world of cell phone recycling, there's a bit of misunderstanding of what it actually means to recycle something. But anyway, I went to one of these facilities where they process 50,000 phones a month. And we dumped a couple thousand phones out on the ground, and I took this photograph. And this is just a couple thousand phones, so it's just a small percentage of what that one facility processed each month. And the guy there showed me a map of all of the cell phone shredding facilities in the US, and there was so many dots. And I realized, again, I'm just seeing one drop in the river. How could I depict the full scale of our mass consumption? Like, how can we experience that? There's no way we can experience it with our senses. The only thing we have available, the only information we have available to us to try to comprehend the enormity of our consumption is statistics. These numbers that we read, like 210 billion plastic bottles used in the United States last year. These vast numbers that are orders of magnitude higher than we have the ability to comprehend. That's the only information we have. There's no way to photograph it. There's no way to go stand in front of it. And so there's this kind of disconnect. We can't comprehend the phenomena because all we have is these incomprehensible numbers. There are all kinds of interesting studies out there that show that the human mind can't comprehend big numbers, more than a few hundred or a few thousand. And I recently read a really interesting study that showed a radical difference between how we comprehend the number 1 and the number 2. So if you go to a group of people, say at this university, and you were to ask, you show a photograph of one starving child, and you say, how much of your money would you give to save this one starving child? The average number is about $50. And then if you go to a similar group and show them a picture of 2 starving children, and you say, how much of your money would you give to save these 2 starving children, the number goes down to about $5. And if you show any number larger than 7, how much of your money would you give to save these 8 starving children? The number is consistently 0. So those are the kind of numbers we think in, and that we can comprehend and feel something enough to do something about, is numbers that are like the size of our family, tribal-sized numbers. But when we read statistics of hundreds of billions of something, or trillions, now the number of trillions has seeped into our economy. Like we spend $1 trillion on the Iraq war, and we lose $1 trillion when the real estate market crashes. We think we comprehend those numbers. We read those numbers and we talk about them, and they're discussed in the news and among politicians. We don't comprehend those numbers, not even by orders and orders of magnitude. My experience of those kind of numbers is they don't go in one ear and out the other. They go in one ear and bounce right back out the same ear. Nothing happens. If we can't comprehend the phenomena, then we don't feel anything. And when we don't feel anything about the phenomena that characterize our world, then we're disconnected, because it's our feelings that are our connection with the world. If there's a tragedy happening, or there's an atrocity happening in our world, and we feel something about it, then we are personally directly connected to that thing. But if we don't feel anything, if we can't comprehend it in the first place, if we don't feel anything, then we aren't connected. And I think this is a big reason why we have this disconnection between how we know we need to collectively behave, what our scientists all over the world are telling us about how we need to change our behavior, that there's a disconnection between that and how we are collectively behaving. We know we need to make this change, and we're having such a hard time collectively moving toward it. And I think it's not because we're bad. We aren't bad people. It's just that the nature of the information that we're trying to comprehend is so complex and incomprehensible to us. So I'm really interested in this as an artist. I think art can be a bridge to that kind of comprehension and to feeling. But as a photographer, I felt really stuck, because there's this invisible phenomenon that's destroying our world that we're all a part of, and I can't take a photograph of it. And so that led me to this body of work that I call Running the Numbers, where I started creating images out of lots and lots of photographs. And one of the first ones that I did was to try an image. Instead of just a random bunch of 2,000 phones, I started constructing an image of the actual number of phones that we throw out every day. So I got just this many silver phones, and the reason I got silver is when I showed this image in New York, all anybody talked about was how beautiful it was. I wanted to talk about mass consumption, but there's something just so cool looking about the few colored phones, and I made a swirl to feel like a galaxy, to kind of give it this feeling of gravity. And it annoyed me in New York that the whole conversation was about the aesthetics of it. So I said, okay, no color, no swirl, just going to be the most boring possible image that I can, but I want to show the actual number of phones that we throw out every day. And so I had that many phones, and so I photographed them, and then I stirred them around and photographed them again, so I could then stitch those two images together, and it would look like twice as many phones. And I did that for a few days and I kept track of the quantity as I went, and slowly started building this giant canvas in Photoshop that finally added up to the actual number of phones that we throw out in the United States every day. And there it is, 426,000 phones. That's one day of our cell phone consumption. And that doesn't include the packaging and the manufacturing and the electricity and all of the fuel and the energy and materials that went into the factories to create the phone. Like, all of that other stuff has a similar scale associated with it. And it's really interesting, because looking at this, if you saw an actual print of it. It's like 6 by 8 feet or something like that, and you walk all the way up close and you can see every single phone. And looking at it, I realized I didn't comprehend that number. 426,000, that's, when I see it, it's way more than I thought 426,000 was. It's shocking to me to see that quantity visually. I read a tragic statistic about the number of Americans in prison. We have the largest prison population of any country on earth. You guys might already know this. We have the highest percentage of our population incarcerated of any country on earth. And that includes all of the evil dictatorships that we like to point at and say, wag our fingers at. North Korea. We have a larger percentage of our population in jail than North Korea. 2.3 million Americans in jail. And that's just an astonishing tragedy. And there are lots of reasons, and part of it is that the prison system has been privatized, and so now there are for-profit companies with lobbyists in Washington lobbying for stricter prison penalties to fill up their jails, and it's a growing industry, the only one of those in the world. So I wanted to show what does 2.3 million of something look like to represent all of the Americans in jail. And so I rented a bunch of prison uniforms from a Hollywood costume place. I first called up the Seattle jail and I said, would you guys mind if I borrowed 50 prison uniforms? And I told them I just want to take a photograph of them, but they said, we can't trust you to not like dress up all your friends and run around downtown and shout, we got away, we got away. So they wouldn't lend them to me, so I had to rent them in Hollywood. And so I photographed them. I put them on my studio table and I photographed them, and then I cut out the white background. And then I stacked it into another stack and photographed it again until I had several hundred photographs that I could then build into a giant image. And that's 50, so it was easy to keep track as I pasted and pasted and pasted. And it took me a few days of building this gigantic image. And eventually we'll pull so far back that you can't even see the individual uniforms anymore. But there's the full image, 11 by 23 feet. And each prison uniform is about the size of a dime on its edge. And I remember when I have a large format printer in my studio, and I printed each one of those panels out, and as they slowly came out of the printer, it took hours for each one to come out of the printer, and I was just absolutely astonished to see how many 2.3 million is. Because those are the kind of numbers we read. If you read there are 2.3 million Americans in jail, you'd be like, well, is that too many? I don't know, 2.3 million? Like, what if it's 4 million? Would that be way worse? And what if somebody told you, well, actually, this year, now it's 8 million? Like, it just doesn't even register. Those numbers are just sort of these completely abstract things that we have no comprehension. But to see the number of Americans in jail is every time I stand in front of that piece when I go to an exhibition, even though I built it and spent all the hours building it, it shocks me one more time to see the enormity of that number. Here's a picture of a forest that I built out of 139,000 cigarette butts, which is the number of cigarette butts that are littered in the United States every 15 seconds. It's by far the most littered object. When people go do cleanups like along highways, 96% of all litter is cigarette butts. And most smokers think that they're innocuous. It's like throwing a banana peel out the window. But cigarette butts contain a filter which is made of a highly toxic kind of plastic called cellulose acetate, and the whole purpose of the filter is to catch all the most dangerous chemicals that happen from the combustion and hold on to it so it doesn't go in your lungs. And so cigarette butts are extremely toxic. They should be called hazardous waste. The only reason they're not is because of the tobacco industry lobby. So it's raining cigarette butts out there in our parks and forests and highways. So I wanted to make this image. Another statistic that I recently read that really broke my heart is the number of unwanted dogs and cats that are euthanized in the United States. They're just pouring into animal shelters all the time, and the animal shelters that are run by people who love dogs and cats, they don't want to euthanize them. They don't want to be people who kill dogs and cats. They want to be people who nurture and put them out for adoption. But there's so many coming in, so many unwanted dogs and cats coming in, that the animal shelters fill up, and then they have to euthanize them. It's the saddest thing. So I went and got one dog collar, a black dog collar, and one white cat flea collar, and I photographed them in multiple different positions, and then cut them out from their backgrounds in Photoshop, and then I could just start layering them together on a very large Photoshop canvas to make the actual number of dogs, unwanted dogs and cats that are euthanized in the United States every day. This is another tragedy that's just happening right under our noses every day in the US, and this is the continued use of agricultural pesticides that are killing off our bird population. Songbirds in the United States are all going extinct. They're all on their way to extinction. And the most recent number that I read is more than 60 million songbirds in the United States are dying every year from exposure to agricultural pesticides, and a lot of that is Roundup, made by Monsanto. And the way it happens is the pesticides are sprayed on crops, and the whole purpose is to kill insects. So the insects ingest the pesticide, and that's what birds eat, is insects. And the pesticides are neurotoxins made to kill creatures. And so when birds eat the insects, then the birds die. And they're dying at a much, much higher rate than they can reproduce. And any of you who are my age remember that when we were kids and we would go running out in the fields, there were clouds of birds everywhere. And now you don't see very many, or almost none. And I was recently in the Czech Republic photographing, and in the Czech Republic, Monsanto continues to use pesticides that aren't even legal in this country anymore, and all of the fields there are being sprayed with those pesticides, and there are no birds left in the Czech Republic. I was walking through forests, and I did not hear a single bird. It's like these silent forests. So I made a piece about that, about the number of birds dying in the US from exposure to agricultural pesticides. I call it Silent Spring. And I worked with a really amazing artist who draws beautiful pictures of birds with pencil. So she made me 36 individual drawings of songbirds, and I scanned them and then cut them out from their background in Photoshop, and just started pasting to make a flock of birds that was equal to the number of birds that die in the United States from exposure to pesticides every day. So we're slowly zooming back from this very large-scale artwork that I call Silent Spring in honor of Rachel Carson. We act when we feel something. That's how we change. That's how culture changes, and that's how we each change individually. It's how we grow and evolve as a people, is when we feel something. When we feel angry enough about an injustice that's happening, then we change. Or when we feel frightened enough about something we see coming in the future, then we change our course. Or when we feel sad enough about what's being lost, when we feel our grief about something that's being lost, about a tragedy that's happening, then we change. And this to me is the missing piece in our culture now, is we're becoming slowly more and more disconnected from what we feel. And that's my wish as an artist, is to contribute to a reconnection, to help bring the locus of our consciousness out of our mind. We're getting more and more in our mind, to help us remember that we're still mammals. We're still creatures living an inherently sensual, sensuous experience. And if we could remember together that we feel something about these tragedies that are happening in our own country, then that's the motivation. That's the fuel that helps us turn the ship. I got interested in ocean plastic a few years back. I first heard about it in 2008, just as it first began to come into public consciousness. And the thing that I heard, that you guys have probably all heard, is that there's a floating island of plastic garbage in the middle of the Pacific Ocean that's twice the size of Texas. And the ocean lover inside of me just went like, oh my God, that's the most horrible thing I've ever heard. And the photographer inside of me thought, something that I can photograph. It's not invisible. I want to go in a boat to the middle of that patch, climb to the top of the mast with my camera, and make a photograph of horizon to horizon floating plastic garbage, and bring that home and blow everybody's minds. And so I went to a meeting of lots of scientists. It was in the middle of 2008. There was a small meeting held of all of the people in the world who knew anything about plastic in the ocean. There was just about 15 of us sitting around a conference table. And the reason I went to the meeting is to meet all of the scientists who go out on research vessels, because I was planning on bumming a ride on one of their boats so that I could float to the middle of the Pacific garbage patch. And what these scientists told me was, there is no Pacific garbage patch. It's named wrong. Plastic behaves in the ocean just the way smoke behaves in the atmosphere, just the way we would imagine. It comes out of rivers. That's how most plastic gets into the ocean. It comes out of polluted rivers, and most of those are in Asia and Indonesia. And as it comes out of a polluted river, if you're right at the mouth of the river, you could probably see lots of it. And if you were measuring, you'd be able to catch lots of it in a net. And if you go 10 kilometers out, it's already starting to spread way out. You might just see a piece here and a piece there and a piece there. And if you go 1,000 miles out into the ocean, then you barely see any. And there are some currents that move it, sort of like smoke going with the wind, but it doesn't collect in the middle. It's not all swirling to the middle. And it also breaks down all the time into smaller and smaller pieces until eventually they become so small you can't even see them. So most of the plastic in the ocean is even like smaller than 1 millimeter. And it doesn't bob on the surface like a cork. Imagine a laundry hamper that goes out. It's below the surface a little bit. Or plastic bags. We've all seen images of plastic bags in the water. They're down in the water column. They might be 60 feet down, moving with the vertical currents. So these guys told me, we're really sorry, but there's no way you can photograph the Pacific garbage patch. It's invisible. But if you could be a wizard and reach under the Pacific Ocean and lift all of the plastic out and bring it all to one place, it would be a pile of plastic bigger than Mount Everest. But as it is, you're stuck. As you are with all of those other consumer issues, you can't take a photograph of it. There's no satellite picture of it. It's impossible to photograph because it's invisible. So I'm just going to go really fast through this piece because we left it behind a while back. So that's the piece that I made out of lots and lots of ocean plastic. 2.4 million pieces of ocean plastic. The estimated number of pounds of plastic that enter the world's oceans every day. So there's Midway. It rang to me like a poem or like a kind of parable emanating from this acupuncture point of the globe, this place that had already been a kind of fulcrum point in human history, as the turning point of World War II happened right in that exact same place. And so I mustered the resources and went there. And that's what I found. I experienced these scenes as being like a mirror. In one way, when we look at those birds, we see the tragedy that's happening there. We can think of the individual birds, the pain that they must have felt, the tragedy and injustice of them dying these innocent beings that are dying just because of our inadvertent waste. And in another way, it's a message back to us. It's a reflection of us. It's a reflection of our culture. And a reflection of humanity's broken relationship with the living world. None of the plastic in any of these images was moved or arranged or put in the birds. This is exactly as we found them. These are straight documentary photographs of the unaltered stomach contents of baby albatrosses on one of the most remote islands on Earth. You can see this one has a shotgun shell in it. I came back from that first trip, and on that first trip to Midway, I thought that was my only, I thought I was done with my project. I came back from that trip pretty devastated by what I'd experienced. And I published my series of photographs. I put them up on my website, and I was astonished that they went much more viral. They reached a far larger audience than any work that I'd ever done previously. And I started receiving emails from all over the world, from people who had seen them, from teachers who were showing them to their students, and from environmentalists, from people all over the world. And the message that I got was that it made them feel hopeless. And that really broke my heart, because that's not the intention that I have. The reason that I do the work that I do is to reconnect. It's sort of, I think of it like therapy. Like I went into therapy to learn about the ways that I can fix myself. And I want my work to have an inspirational kind of quality. I don't want it to have an energy that's like, blah, more horrible news. I don't want it to make people feel hopeless. So I wanted to publish a book of these images, and I went to my teachers, the people I think of as my teachers, some shamans that I work with, and a medicine healer that I work with, and a poet who I'm good friends with. Actually, you probably know Terry Tempest Williams, who lives in Salt Lake City. And all of them said the same thing. I said, can you help me think of something I can write that will be hopeful? So I can publish this work, but it won't have this horrible effect. It'll have an inspirational effect. And we looked at this work together, and we cried together about it, and they all said the same thing. They said, we can't think of anything hopeful to say. These are the most horrible pictures we've ever seen. And they said, we don't know what to suggest to you, except only one thing, is you were only there, you only saw one sliver of a story. And we don't know what the rest of that story might be. But you have to go back to that island. And I remember hearing that and feeling this dread, because Midway was a killing field. It was this dark, dead, horrible smelling place. that I never wanted to see again. But I knew I had to go back. There's something more that I haven't seen yet. And I'll never forget when I stepped off the plane, the government plane, the second time, and the door opened, and instead of meeting this silent graveyard of dead birds, I was met with this cacophony of sound. As I stepped off the plane, I saw 1 million of these magnificent white beings, the albatrosses, dancing and singing. They dance and sing all day long and all night long. You have to wear earplugs sleeping because the noise, the din of the birds is so loud. And they're as big as eagles. They're immense birds with strong beaks and a wingspan that's 8 feet. They stand maybe that tall on the ground. And they have no fear of humans. They've lived on this island for 4 million years. They have no fear instinct. They've never had a predator. And so you can walk out among them in fields of hundreds of thousands of them. They're standing elbow to elbow. They're so close to each other. You can walk out among them, and not only do they not run away and fly away, but they actually come toward us. They're curious. You can see, they look. Even 50 feet away, you can see them like, what's that thing over there? And then their greeting is to bob their head, and you see them from 50 feet away. They're bobbing their head, and you're like, hey, dude, how's it going? And they come closer and closer and closer. And we had our lenses. You know how when lenses focus, they go from infinity, and then you go closer and closer and closer and closer, and then it stops at the closest that the lens will focus. And that maybe that's 2 feet away or 3 feet away is the closest it will go. And they came much closer than that. So as I was photographing them, I'm like, oh man, I need a different lens. Because they came all the way up and they'd look this close, and with their beak, they have this really sharp beak that can break the skin easily. And they come up and they just gently test our face and test our earlobes and test our shoelaces. They untie our shoes. And their mating dance was this incredibly beautiful, graceful, elegant courtship, this communication between them to create a bond that lasts for the whole rest of their life. And I realized a couple of things. I first realized that I had forgotten something incredibly important about life in all of my years of looking at the bad news as an artist. I had forgotten that the bad news of our world is not the whole story. And I think this is something that happens to environmentalists a lot. We're looking at the bad news. Every day we read the bad news, and every day more bad news comes in. And it seems to get worse and worse, faster and faster. And we know that if we turn away from the bad news, we're living in denial. We have to keep our eye on the monster. But these birds just reminded me that that's not the whole story. And it was the name of the island that was the teaching, midway. To stand midway between the bad news and the immense beauty that we're all bathed in every day, in every moment. And I realized I had to make a film. You have to see these birds in motion. I would see them doing their incredibly beautiful mating dance, and I would go click, click, and it didn't capture it. You have to see how graceful the motion is and how attuned they are to each other. They become perfectly synchronized with each other. And so I started making a film, and I spent 8 years going back and forth to the island with better and better filming gear each time, and then editing a film together that I call Albatross. And I want to show you a couple of clips from Albatross. So we're temporarily going to jump to my desktop. This is the trailer that I made for this film. And you don't have to clap at the end. Kind of never seems like something to clap for.
Do we have the courage to face the realities of our time and allow ourselves to feel deeply enough that it transforms us and our future? Come with me on a journey through the eye of beauty. Across an ocean of grief. And beyond.
I had a transformational experience on Midway Island, being with the birds as the babies hatched from the eggs and as they died, filled with plastic. And it became kind of the foundation for my 8-year project called Albatross. And it was a teaching that came from my experience with the birds that was about the nature of grief. I've always thought that grief is a bad experience. It's something that I thought if I feel a lot of grief, that's kind of the same as despair or depression. And there's a lot of bad news happening in our world. And the artworks that I showed you a little bit earlier, the number of Americans in prison, like when I think of that, I feel grief. And the number of birds that are dying from exposure to pesticides. And there's a smorgasbord of those kind of issues out there that we read about all the time. And every time we think we know them all, there's a new one, a new tragedy. And I always had this idea that if I let myself feel all of my sadness for all of the sad things that are happening in our world, and allow myself to feel it at the full scale of how bad the bad news is, that I'm just going to be a sad person forever. I'm going to fall into hopelessness and despair and paralysis and depression. I thought that's where grief would lead me. Down a hellhole from which there is no escape. And on Midway Island, being with these birds as they died, really, I was surprised to find how much grief I felt. Because for my whole life up until that point, I never thought about albatross. I wouldn't have thought that I cared about them. And as they died, as we filmed them as they died, as they choked to death on cigarette lighters and toothbrushes, I found myself breaking into tears every time, feeling this tremendous grief. And it happened so many times that it became a little bit like Groundhog Day, where I began to sort of step back from the experience and observe it. I think I might need that other microphone shortly. I think this battery is dying. It's dropping out every now and then. If you can bring the other mic. Thank you, darling. Okay. Thank you, guys. And I began to notice that being with the dying birds, first of all, it was this incredibly vivid experience. That's one thing I could say, is that time seemed to slow down, and the colors seemed brighter, and in a strange way, I felt incredibly alive. I felt really, really there. And I began to let go of the judgment that grief is bad, and just be in the profound experience of it. And then I realized, I asked myself, why am I feeling so much grief? And I realized that the only reason that I felt sadness for these birds was because I loved them. That's what grief is. Grief is not the same as despair or depression. Grief is the same as love. It's a felt experience of love for something that we're losing or that we've lost. Or a felt experience of love for another being who is suffering that we love. And I found that to be an incredibly liberating realization, because it allowed me to fully feel my sadness. And I realized that what grief is, it's not a doorway down to a hellhole. It's a doorway home. It's a doorway that carries us home to the deepest part of ourself, where our compassion, where our wisdom resides. Our essential nature. Grief brings us home to our essential nature, which is to be in love with the miracle of life. The miracle we've each been gifted with in our own life, and the miracle of our living world. I believe that's our essential nature. That's how we're all born. And we can see it in children. They just walk around like, wow, look at this. They have this amazement and wonderment and this innate magnetic attraction to anything that's alive. I think that's our essential nature, and that's the essential nature that we slowly are becoming disconnected from. As we become adults and with all of the rushing around, we're losing contact with our built-in love for the miracle that we're all a part of. And on Midway Island, I found a doorway home to that. And I came to see how that this illusion that I had been living in and that our culture lives in, that we're grief averse. We're afraid of grief. And I believe that if we could collectively allow ourselves to grieve what is being lost, to return home together, to really feel our love for each other and for the living world, then everything could change. Because there's no more powerful, motivating feeling to change than love. And that's my wish for our world. The solution to the healing of our world is not out there. It's in here, in our consciousness, in our collective consciousness. And that gives me hope because it's something that can change in the blink of an eye. One of the other lessons, I want to show you one more short clip from the film that's a really beautiful lesson that I received from my teachers there, the albatrosses, about curiosity. The albatrosses are curious. And it's so interesting to see a creature from another species, to see what curiosity looks like, to see these beings. You can see the curiosity in their eyes as they come toward us. And I thought about curiosity, and what is curiosity? It's the desire to know the other. I think it's maybe our deepest, it's the deepest instinct of all. Deeper than any feeling. It's just a desire to know, like, what are you? What are you? What's your experience? The desire to encounter the other. But curiosity is fragile. In the presence of only a little bit of fear, then we're like, whoa, never mind, not curious. And I thought about in the human world right now, this is one of the problems that I mentioned at the very beginning that's happening in so many universities right now. There's not so much curiosity between people anymore. Everybody's staking out their territory and power struggling with each other, but there's not so much like, tell me about your religion. What is your spiritual view of the universe? I'm interested to hear. You don't hear that very often anymore. Who are you? Everybody's just like, I want to tell you who I am. I'm defining myself. There's very little like, who are you? I'm interested. And that's the product of fear. That's what fear does to us. It says, whoa, never mind. I'm not curious about you. So here is a creature from another species breaking through fear and reminding us what curiosity looks like. Just take me 1 second to get this set up. And this is one short clip from my film Albatross. Maybe turn the sound up a little bit.
One thing that's immediately evident about them is they have almost no fear of us. They're not tame, and if we try to touch them, they can bite. But I found that if I moved in slowly, stayed close to the ground, and met them on their level, They accepted my presence. It was a thrilling experience to enter into such intimate space with these wild creatures. What is it like to look out through the eyes of an albatross? To perceive the world filtered through their mind.
Wasn't she gorgeous? My film Albatross it's given to the world as a gift. I released it last year. It's available on our website for free, albatrossthefilm.com. You can download it and own it, share it with others freely, stream it for free, and it's a love story. It's a journey into grief and into beauty. So I hope you get to watch it and feel free to share it with your friends. It's been a real honor and delight to be here for the last few days. I see a really beautiful energy here that is inspiring to me. So thank you all and cheers.